The snow hadn't yet started falling when they called her crazy. That was always how it went out here. The sky could be gentle, the creek still trickling, the wind whispering like it was spring. And still, if a woman moved in ways the men didn't understand, the laughter would start. Sometimes behind her back, but often not. That winter it was out loud, and the name they'd started using in town, loud enough for the children to hear, was the Hobbit lady. She didn't rise to it. She didn't even look their way when they said it. Instead, Clara Holt dropped her basket into the snowbank beside the ridge and pulled her hood tighter over her head, eyes squinting against the afternoon glare, and kept dragging stones. She dragged them across the clearing one by one, heaving them into a strange curved line that went not up, but down. And the worst of it, the wall she was building wasn't even a wall. It was a circle, a useless, dirt-ringed trench lined with logs and sod, a ring of thick clay and pine branches wrapped low into the side of the hill like a grave dug sideways, with no chimney, no smoke, no sense to it at all. Even the school children came to gawk once word got out. They thought she was making a cellar and got lost halfway through. But Clara didn't explain, not when Ephraim Kettler, with his 3 horses and new stovepipe, leaned on his saddle horn and said loud enough for the crowd, "What she needs is a man, not a molehole." Not when the preacher's wife clucked, "She's burying herself alive before the Lord calls her." Not even when her eldest boy, Thomas, all of 10 and trying not to look embarrassed, asked her flat out, "Ma, why don't we just build a real house like the Murdens?" Her answer was always the same, always quiet. "We will be warm." But nobody heard the second half of the sentence. She always saved it for herself. "And we will live." She'd lost her husband the year before. Pneumonia, they said, but truth be told, Clara knew better. It wasn't just sickness that stole Henry Holt. It was pride, the kind of pride that built a tall cabin too fast with too many cracks, that chopped wood until he dropped just to prove he could, that ignored the cold until it crushed his lungs like a boot heel. Clara saw him spit blood into his sleeve that last night and still tell her it was just the wind. She'd held his hand while he went still, and the minute he died, it was like every nail in that proud house turned inward, cold creeping in through the gaps between logs, the floor freezing over with every wind that snuck beneath the boards. That house was a coffin dressed up like a home, and Clara wasn't going to bury her children in it. Not this winter. Not when they said the worst freeze in 20 years was on its way. Not when her youngest, Henry Jr., still wheezed from the last bout of croup and her daughter Anna cried in her sleep from the chill that came up through the bedding. So she built what no one else would build. She dug down, first with a shovel, then with her bare hands, then with a flattened kettle when her shovel broke against a rock. She dug a half circle into the hill behind the old cabin, hauling dirt out by the armful, laying pine boughs in layers, then covering them with clay mixed with ash. She burned logs just to use the ashes to thicken the walls, stirred mud by lantern light, cut sod with a hatchet when the frost came. She never slept more than 2 hours at a time. She never cried. Not once, not even when the cut on her palm opened wide and bled into the snow, or when her daughter begged her to stop because the boys at the creek called her Goblin Girl for helping her mama with a rat hole. Clara just smiled and said, "Let them laugh. They'll stop when the snow falls." And then it did. Not gentle, not flurries. It came down like the wrath of God. It was mid-November when the wind turned sharp and the sky darkened at noon like a curtain dropped over the land. By dusk, the first white waves swept over the treetops and buried the road in less than an hour. By morning, the town was trapped. Wagons froze to the ground, doors cracked with the cold, and the chimneys that had once puffed proudly above each cabin now trembled under a blanket of snow that crept higher by the hour. Inside the Holt cabin, what little remained of it, the windows shattered from the pressure, the roof sagged under the weight, but no one was there to see it. Clara had moved her children into the dugout at the first sign of the storm. They didn't want to go. Anna cried. Thomas argued. Henry Jr. just whimpered, but she forced them below, down the narrow stair of logs, into the belly of the earth she'd carved herself. She'd layered the floor with animal hides and straw, the walls with clay so thick she could punch them without shaking dust loose. At the back of the curved shelter, she had packed hot stones from a fire into a dugout pit, covered with a thick slab of slate, then built a low bed of cedar branches over it. The warmth rose slowly, trapped by the domed ceiling she'd formed with overlapping bark, tar, and earth. No stove, no chimney, no smoke to give them away, nothing to catch fire, nothing to collapse, just heat rising up through the stone, staying in the air, and silence. Deep, muffled silence, like the earth itself had taken them in. 3 days into the freeze, the town went quiet. The preacher's wife stopped coming to check on the neighbors. Ephraim Kettler's horses froze in their stalls. The Murdens lost 2 children. The schoolhouse roof split open, and no one came to fix it. Firewood ran low. And what good was firewood if your cabin had no insulation, no way to keep the heat inside? They burned chairs, blankets, books, and still the cold came. But beneath the hill, Clara and her children stayed warm. Not just alive, warm. Anna's cough stopped. Henry Jr. smiled in his sleep. Thomas rapped his arms around his mother one night and whispered, "I'm sorry I said it was foolish." She only pulled him close and said, "It's not over yet," because she knew what was coming next. They all thought it would just be a blizzard, but Clara had heard the signs in the wind weeks before the clouds came. The sound of tree trunks popping in the hills, the sudden silence of the birds, the river shrinking too fast. This wasn't just snow. This was going to be a freeze, the kind that doesn't let up, the kind that kills in days, not weeks, the kind that makes men leave their own cabins in the night looking for somewhere, anywhere warmer to die. And they came. On the 6th night, just before dawn, Clara heard the crunch of boots above. She silenced her children with a hand and waited. She knew those steps. She knew the way men walked when they had nothing left to lose. Slow, heavy, hopeful, and ashamed all at once. The sound of gloves on the hillside, breath in the air above the shelter, voices whispering. Then a call. "Clara?" It was Ephraim Kettler, but he didn't sound proud anymore. He didn't sound like a man with 3 horses and a new stovepipe. He sounded like a man trying not to fall asleep standing up. "We know you're in there," he said, voice hoarse. "We saw the snow's not sunk in over this spot. We thought maybe—" Another voice. "Please, ma'am, my boy's, he's cold, please." Thomas looked up at her with wide eyes. Anna clutched her sleeve. Henry Jr. started crying. Clara didn't speak. She pressed her finger to her lips and whispered, "Shh," because the shelter could hold 4, maybe 5, not 10. And outside, there were more than 10. She knew what came next. She'd built her home hidden for a reason. Because when warmth runs out in the cold, people lose sense. They stop asking nicely. They start prying. They start breaking. They start trying to take. And Clara had buried something else in the earth besides a home. Right near the entrance, packed deep into the clay by the narrow tunnel, was an old shotgun she hadn't touched since her husband died. Wrapped in waxcloth, loaded, dry, she prayed she wouldn't have to touch it again. But she also prayed they'd go away, because the worst part of winter wasn't the cold. It was what people became when they were dying. And Clara Holt was no longer just a mother. She was a wall, a buried wall. And the storm had only just begun. The silence above the earth didn't last long. At first, it was just Ephraim's voice calling again, weaker than before, then hushed by another man, someone with more sense or less hope. Then there were footsteps, pacing, pausing, pacing again, shuffling boots, muffled coughing, and then the crunch of retreat. Not fast, like men deciding to give up. Slow, like they didn't want to leave, like they had nowhere to go but still turned away. Clara didn't move for another hour. She sat with her back to the wall, listening to the sound of Anna's quiet breathing beside her, Thomas's shallow inhale as he strained to hear if they were safe. Henry Jr. had fallen asleep with his cheek against her leg, one small hand wrapped around her threadbare skirt like he thought she might vanish if he let go. And she almost did vanish inside herself, because Clara had not lied when she said they would be warm. They were. The warmth came up through the stone as planned. The heat trapped in the tight seal of the dugout had stayed with them, and the clay walls didn't weep or flake or give. But Clara also knew what would come next. Hunger. The storm would hold longer than the food would. They had flour, barely enough for a few more bannocks, and a bit of dried venison, some root vegetables buried in the pit, a few eggs stored in snow-packed straw that might not have cracked yet. But the butter had been gone a week. The lard ran out after that, and she'd already split the last apple 4 ways. She chewed her portion in the dark the night before, let the juice sting the inside of her mouth, and swallowed it dry. She told the children they'd have soup tomorrow, but they all knew soup was code for thin, too thin. She rubbed her thumb along the corner of the dugout wall, thinking how much colder it would be if she hadn't buried it just deep enough to trick the frost. How much colder it would get still. She didn't look up when Thomas spoke, but she heard him. "Ma, what if they come back?" She didn't answer. He tried again. "If they come back and try to get in?" Clara waited a long time before speaking. When she finally did, her voice was dry, like stone on stone. "Then we don't let them," Anna whimpered. Thomas looked down, and Clara knew they were starting to understand something they hadn't wanted to understand before. The world was not built to be kind. Not now. not this deep in the freeze. And surviving meant not just hiding, but defending, even from people they once knew, even from neighbors. 2 more days passed, the snow above packed tighter, heavier, muffling the world like wool wrapped over the earth's ears. Inside, it became harder to tell what time it was. They couldn't see light through the sod-layered ceiling, and even if they'd tried to peek through the narrow vent pipe Clara had hidden behind a clump of pine needles, it was buried now. She'd checked and cleared it every few hours, but it still froze over. Only the warmth inside their tiny space kept the air bearable. On the 3rd day, Henry Jr. started coughing again. It was dry at first, just a tickle. Clara pressed her hand to his chest, warm but not fevered. She reached for one of the last pieces of root and shaved it down to boil, a thin tea. Useless, probably, but she gave it to him anyway. Thomas offered to take less food. Anna didn't speak much anymore, and Clara began to watch them sleep, not with tenderness, but calculation. Because there were 5 meals left, maybe 6 if she thinned it, but not 7, not 9, and even if the snow stopped falling above them, the air outside would still be a blade. There'd be no walking to town, no foraging, no firewood out there that hadn't already been taken, no game foolish enough to move in this freeze, unless something desperate moved first. And desperation had a shape. Clara heard it again on the 7th night. Not voices this time, not pleading, shovels, scraping, slow and muffled but steady, coming from the northern face of the hill, far enough not to be above them, but too close to be anyone just looking for wood. Clara didn't light the lantern. She just knelt by the entrance tunnel, pressed her ear to the soil that framed the log-reinforced passage, and listened. Men, multiple, digging, murmuring, working in low whispers, trying to find the heat they knew had to be coming from somewhere, trying to find her. She went still, eyes adjusting to the dark, and moved to the back of the shelter. She felt for the waxcloth bundle, unwrapped it, checked the hammer, loaded. She didn't let herself flinch when the sound of the spade hit rock outside, didn't even blink, but Thomas did, and she saw the way his mouth opened, just barely. "Ma!" She cut him off with a single look, the kind that says this is not a time for childhood. This is not a world that allows it. "Take Henry," she whispered, "and Anna. Back of the shelter. Keep them quiet." He didn't argue, just nodded and did it. Good boy, strong boy, smarter than his father had been in the end. The sound of the digging got closer. Clara moved to the wall of the passage. The dugout curved slightly, making it hard to reach directly, but she felt around for the collapsible section she'd prepared in case the snow ever caved in from above. A soft, clay-padded log frame, removable, just wide enough for one body. She whispered a prayer to nothing in particular, then pulled it. The passage opened. Cold rushed in, but it was not snow. It was a man, face white, eyes wide, hands trembling with the cold and the shame of it. He gasped when he saw her. She saw the blade in his hand, and she saw the boy behind him. A boy not older than Thomas, holding nothing, just shivering. "Please," the man croaked. "Just my son. Just let him in. He's all I got." Clara didn't raise the gun. Not yet. But she didn't move either. The man stepped forward, one boot inside. "Ma'am," he said, "I ain't asking you to die for us. Just let the boy stay. Just him." The boy didn't speak, just stared at Clara with eyes that didn't blink. She stared back, and then she did something she didn't expect to do. She lowered the shotgun. "You," she said to the man, "get back out. Now. You break any snow in this vent or block the air hole, we all die. You understand me?" He nodded, lips quivering. Then she looked at the boy. "Come here." He didn't move. Clara took a step back. "I'll feed him when I can," she said. "But he works. He stays quiet. You want him to live? That's how it is." The man looked at his son, then back at Clara. "Thank you," he said. He vanished into the dark, and the boy stepped inside. His name was Eli. He didn't say much the first day. Clara gave him a half ration. He ate it like an animal, then curled up beside Henry Jr., and didn't stir. The next morning, he woke before anyone else and started rearranging the hides to keep the warmth better. Clara watched, said nothing. He never cried, never whimpered. And when the wind above shifted again, when it howled instead of groaned, when it sharpened like teeth, Eli didn't flinch. He just said, "There's another storm coming," and Clara believed him, because he said it the same way she said things, like someone who'd seen more than they should. By the 10th day, the food was nearly gone. The last of the root stew had been scraped from the kettle. They crushed stale grains into paste. Clara gave the children warm water with ash to trick the stomach. It didn't help much. She began rationing sleep too, not to save energy, but to stay vigilant, because more people had come. 2 at first, then 3 more. 1 woman, 1 child, a man with a knife who didn't ask. She fired a shot over his head. He left screaming, but it wouldn't work next time. They would come in the dark, come with numbers, come with fire or blades or worse, and they would not beg. They would take, unless Clara stopped them, and she would, even if it meant dying in the hole she dug with her bare hands, even if it meant the children never understood why, even if the snow above them never melted. She would stop them, because this Hobbit hole they mocked, it wasn't a fantasy, it wasn't a game, it was a tomb if she let it be, or it was a womb waiting to birth something stronger, a new kind of survival, a new kind of mother, the kind who didn't wait for help, the kind who made her own law beneath the earth. And then, just before dawn on the 12th day, Clara heard something different. Not voices, not snow, a crack, a groan, a distant collapse. From above, not at the hill, not near the entrance, farther off, a cabin. The roof, maybe, or a chimney gone, maybe more. Eli sat up fast. "I heard it too," he said. Thomas was already awake, boots on. Clara rose, because if cabins were falling, it meant people would be moving. And if people were moving, "They'll come for us tonight," she said aloud, and she was right. But what none of them expected was what came first. Not people, not men, but smoke, rising from the valley below, curling high into the sky like a signal. A fire, a real one, large, bright, blazing through the snow, calling everyone, calling Clara, and drawing them all out, towards something worse. The smoke was real. Clara knew it from the smell alone. It wasn't chimney smoke, not pine or aspen or oak. It had a bitter bite to it, like tar or kerosene or something oil-fed and angry, rising in a long black stalk into the pale dawn air. That meant someone had started a real fire, big, exposed, and either desperate or dangerous enough to not care who saw, which meant two things. One, the freeze wasn't letting up, and two, something terrible was about to happen. Eli was already standing, the pale light catching the edges of his gaunt cheeks. "That's not a campfire," he muttered, but Clara already knew. Thomas stood beside him. "Should we check it?" "No," Clara said flatly. "We wait." But inside, she didn't want to wait. Inside, she was doing what she hadn't allowed herself to do in nearly 2 weeks. She was calculating risks beyond the shelter, because this hole in the ground, as warm as it was, would not last forever. The food was gone, the water was dwindling, and now, with others hunting warmth, desperate and wild-eyed, she might not be able to protect the dugout by silence and threats alone. A big fire out in the open, that meant someone was drawing people in, maybe baiting them, maybe bluffing with warmth. Either way, it would pull folks out of their holes like moths, and some of those moths would come knocking here again. But not to ask this time. They'd come with frostbitten hands and teeth clenched from starvation. Clara knew the look. She'd seen it once, in the war. She'd been just a girl, but she remembered the eyes of a man who'd wandered into their camp with a face blue from cold and a knife in his hand, muttering about taking what's owed. Her father had shot him before he reached the fire. She never forgot the silence afterward, or how the snow took the blood so easily, like it had been waiting for it. The freeze made monsters of men, so no, waiting wouldn't work. Not anymore. They needed a plan. They needed a way out. And somehow she had to see that fire. By nightfall, she'd made her decision. She pulled Thomas aside, knelt beside him near the fire pit at the center of the shelter, long cooled now to a dull warmth radiating from the stones, and whispered low, "You're in charge while I'm gone." He looked at her like she'd slapped him. "Gone? I'll be back before dawn. You can't go. What if—" She gripped his shoulders, firm. "If I don't go, none of us makes it through the next week. That fire's either hope or danger. But either way, we have to know. I need to see it. I need to hear what's out there." "But Ma, if they come while I'm gone," she interrupted, "you don't let them in, no matter what they say, not even if they say my name, not even if they sound kind." His voice broke. "But what if it is you? I'll knock 3 times. Wait, then once. You hear anything else? You don't answer. Understand?" He nodded barely. She kissed his forehead, then Anna's, then little Henry's. Eli watched her silently. When she turned to leave, he stepped forward. "I'll come with you." "No, I can help. I know the land. I know the cold. I'm fast. I'm quiet." They stared at each other a long moment. Then Clara sighed. "You don't speak unless I ask you to, and you follow every step I take." Eli nodded once, and then they were gone. Clara emerged from the shelter as silently as she'd descended nearly 2 weeks ago. The air outside was thinner than before, not warmer, but less still, less muffled. That worried her. Storms go quiet when they build. The silence was a lie. The snow came up to her thighs in places, but she knew the route. She moved sideways across the slope, through the narrow stand of spruce where the branches hung low enough to shake the snow loose, covering their trail behind them. Eli followed every motion, silent as promised. They crept toward the rise, overlooking the frozen valley road, and what they saw made Clara's blood go cold. It wasn't a fire from a cabin. It wasn't even a signal. It was a funeral pyre, a pile of bodies, 3, maybe 4, stacked against a broken wagon, and set alight with a barrel of what had to be lamp oil. The blaze crackled hungrily, flames licking high into the black sky, embers scattered on the wind like sparks from hell, and around it stood 3 men, not mourning, laughing. One of them held a torch, another had a rifle slung over one shoulder, and a sack in the other, something sagging and heavy. The third was younger, with a knife strapped to each leg, and a long coat crusted with frost. Clara didn't recognize any of them. They weren't from town, not settlers, not even scavengers. These were carrion crows, men who traveled the frontier when things fell apart, who didn't wait for permission to take what they wanted. Clara had heard of them before, stories told in dark corners of supply stations, whispered warnings from trappers and lone riders, bandits of winter, snow wolves in men's clothing, the kind that didn't just steal from the dying, but made sure there were more dying to steal from. She counted the weapons. 3 guns, at least 2 knives, 1 axe resting on the broken wagon wheel. They were laughing over something in the bag. Meat, she realized. Human or animal, she couldn't tell from here. It didn't matter. She turned to Eli. His jaw was clenched tight. Seen them before? He nodded once. They come from the pass, he whispered. Used to run with trappers, but they started hunting travelers instead. How many? More than just these. Maybe 6 total? Maybe 8? Where are the others? Could be looking, could be watching. That meant they could be near the shelter. Clara gritted her teeth. They couldn't go back the way they came. If these men had found others, or marked trails, they'd find the dugout. It was only a matter of time. We have to draw them off, Clara said. Now, Eli blinked. How? She looked back at the fire, then at the trees around them, then at the ridge beyond, and she smiled, cold and sharp. They want heat. We'll give them heat. They moved fast. Clara led Eli in a wide arc around the hill, back toward the abandoned Murden homestead, which had half collapsed after the first blizzard. The roof was mostly gone, the chimney split, but the walls still stood, barely. She grabbed the broken door and dragged it inside. Then she lit the fire, not big, just enough smoke, just enough to be seen. Then they fled back down the slope, past the creek, toward the old trail that once led to the trade route. She used pine branches to scatter snow across their tracks, left torn cloth tied to a low branch, an old boot print near a stump, just enough clues, just enough bait. By the time they returned to the shelter entrance, the first howls were in the air. Dogs, or worse, men pretending to be them. Voices followed, yells, gunshots, not near, but not far. They ducked into the passage just as the wind shifted and smoke curled above the ridge. But this time, not from her, not from them. Another fire, another light. Someone else had done the same. The whole valley was coming alive with the scent of flame, and all the worst things were waking. Inside, Clara found Thomas still awake, holding the shotgun. His hands trembled, but he didn't speak, just stared at her like she'd gone and come back from the grave. She hugged him hard. You did, perfect, then turned to the others. We don't have much time. She began pulling supplies out from the hidden cache beneath the far wall. Her emergency escape kit, ropes, blankets, tins of old salt pork, a half-broken compass, flint and steel. We leave at first light, she said. We go north, through the hollow ridge. No trails, no roads, no smoke, just trees and silence. Anna's lip trembled. But where? There's a ranger post, empty most winters, but I think it might still stand. 20 miles, maybe less. If we move fast, we make it in 2 days, Henry Jr. coughed. But what about the house? Clara knelt beside him, pressed her hand to his cheek. This house did what it needed to do, she said. It kept us alive. Then she looked up at the sod walls, at the curved ceiling, at the dim warmth that still clung to the earth around them, and she said, barely above a whisper, but it won't keep us safe from what's coming, because now they weren't just surviving a freeze, they were surviving the end of something, of civilization maybe, of order, and what waited in the firelight out there wasn't just cold, it was what people became when the world ran out of warmth. They left before the sun rose, no trail, no fire, no final look back. Clara had wrapped Henry Jr. in every remaining scrap of wool, his cheeks already pale and his breath shallow. Anna wore Thomas's old coat, sleeves rolled and pinned. Eli carried the salt pork and the last tinder bundle. Thomas walked behind Clara with the shotgun held tight across his chest, eyes moving in every direction. Clara walked at the front. Snow crunched beneath her boots like brittle bones. Each step had to be measured, firm, deliberate. If she fell through the crust or misjudged a hollow, it would cost more than time. It would waste the energy they couldn't afford to waste. Her legs already ached from the night before, from crouching, climbing, moving through the dark like a ghost trying to stay one step ahead of wolves. The sun never fully rose. rose, but the sky greyed just enough to mark evening. They'd covered maybe 6 miles. Not enough. Clara knew they had to find shelter before the light faded entirely. The winds were shifting again. She could taste it in the back of her throat. Metallic, sharp, storm's edge. They wouldn't make it through the night out here. Ridge ahead, Eli said quietly, pointing to a fold in the trees. It was a steep incline, too much to climb with Henry on her back. But if they could find a low point, an overhang, they might dig in. They found it 20 minutes later. A shallow cave, barely more than a depression beneath a thick outcrop of limestone. But it was sheltered on 3 sides, with a natural windbreak and enough dead wood nearby to fuel a small, smokeless fire. Clara examined the stone overhead. Stable, dry. It would do. They set to work immediately. Thomas began clearing snow from the entrance. Anna pulled branches to create a barrier. Eli stacked rocks for a wind wall. Clara used the hatchet to dig into the packed snow at the back of the cave, carving space for the children to sleep. And just before night fell, they lit the fire. It was small. It gave no smoke, but the warmth felt like heaven. They huddled together without words, each one listening for sounds beyond the flame. But none came, for now. Clara slammed the ranger post door shut with her shoulder, every inch of her body straining to keep it sealed. The old wood groaned under her weight. Wind had picked up outside, whether from nature or the boots descending the ridge. She couldn't yet tell, but she knew what she'd heard. Men, coming fast, loud now, unafraid, which meant they thought they'd won. She turned, panting. Eli, bolts! Are there bolts? He didn't answer. He was already digging through the shells. Dust exploded as he threw open a drawer and pulled out a rusted iron bar. Here! Thomas was at her side in an instant, jamming it into the brackets on either side of the doorframe. It barely fit. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but with a final shove, it locked into place. Clara turned to the others. Get back. All the way back. Anna had frozen. Henry Jr. clung to her. Clara grabbed the shotgun and checked the shells. 2, just 2 left. No time for fear. No time for prayers. Only time to survive. Outside, the voices grew louder. A man shouted, "We saw you! We just want to talk!" Laughter followed. Another voice, younger, sneered, "Come on out! Be real shame if we had to burn it down." Clara closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them. "Thomas, watch the back wall. There may be a cellar door." He ran. Wood creaked under his boots. Eli pressed his ear to the window slit. 3 of them? No, 4. Same ones from the wagon fire." Clara didn't respond. She moved toward the window and peered through a narrow crack. The men were spaced apart across the clearing. One held a torch. Another leaned on a rifle like it was a walking stick. The third stood near the old pine tree, sharpening a blade slowly against his boot. The fourth, he stood closer to the door. He had a long coat, scars along his neck, and a grin that never touched his eyes. That one was the leader. He stepped forward. "Nice place," he called. "Old ranger post, right? Never figured someone would be dumb enough to squat here in the middle of a storm." Clara said nothing. "You got food? We're mighty hungry." Still silence. "You got children?" he added with a smirk. "We got questions." He waited. When there was still no response, he nodded to the man with the torch. "All right," he said. "Guess we'll knock." The first blow hit the door like a ram, then another. Then came the axe. Thud, thud, crack. The wood was strong, but old. Too old to hold forever. Clara stepped back and raised the shotgun. "If they break through," she said calmly, "I shoot the first. You take the second, Eli. After that, Thomas, you run with Anna and Henry through the cellar if it's open. Don't wait for me." Eli said nothing, just nodded. Thomas was pale. "But Ma, don't wait for me." Then came the splintering. The axe punched through the top panel. A hand reached in. Clara pulled the trigger. The shotgun kicked against her shoulder with a thunderclap, and the hand vanished. Screaming followed. 1 shell left. She cocked it again. The voices outside broke into chaos. "She shot Jed. He's bleeding. Get back." For a moment, just a moment, the pounding stopped. Clara turned to Eli. "Get ready." But then, something happened. A new sound, farther off. A horn, not loud, low, deep, echoing, then a second one. The men outside stopped. One of them hissed, "What the hell was that?" Another, "That ain't us." Eli's eyes went wide. "Rangers?" Clara shook her head. "No one blows a horn to sneak up on bandits." Then they heard it. Footsteps, many footsteps, crunching over snow, slow, synchronized, surrounding the clearing. Voices, but not speaking, chanting. Clara's blood ran cold. The men outside were shouting now, scrambling, running. "They're everywhere. Back, back. They're coming out of the trees." Clara risked a glance out the window and saw torches, dozens of them, surrounding the clearing, moving like ghosts through the snow, in perfect silence save for that endless chant. Men in heavy coats, covered faces, boots that made no sound, not lawmen, not raiders, not townsfolk, others. The door burst open, but it wasn't from force. The iron bar lifted on its own. The door swung in, and standing there was her, the woman from the cave, the one with the boy's voice behind her. Only now she was dressed in furs thick as bear hides, and her face was painted with ash. In one hand, she held a wooden staff with feathers tied at the tip. Her eyes were sharp and sad. She looked past Clara, then down at the children, and finally back at her. "I told you," the woman said softly. "We just wanted shelter." Clara didn't move. The woman stepped forward, just once, then turned and beckoned. From behind her, the torches moved again, and the chanting stopped. Men and women in silence filled the clearing, perhaps 24, faces masked, arms raised in greeting. Some carried sacks, others blankets. One carried what looked like a small iron stove. The woman turned back to Clara. "We were hiding too," she said, "up in the northern ridge, waiting out the freeze. We saw your fire last night." Clara finally found her voice. "You followed?" "We followed hope." Silence stretched between them. Then a sound, a small one, from the trees behind the group. The bandits. They had returned, circling back with pistols raised. But they didn't fire. They didn't even speak. They froze. Because the figures with torches had surrounded them too, without word, without movement. One torchbearer raised his hand. The lead bandit, scarred neck, long coat, looked right at Clara through the open door, and then dropped his weapon. He ran. The others followed. Not chased, not pursued, just driven out by presence, alone. Clara watched as the figures lowered their arms. The horn sounded once more, and then, one by one, they vanished into the trees again, except the woman. She remained. She turned back toward Clara. "Your home, your fire, you kept your children warm. That's all anyone should have to do." Clara didn't know what to say. The woman stepped forward again, holding out a small bundle. "Bread from root flour, not much, but it will last." Clara reached out and took it. Their fingers brushed, and in that touch, just for a moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Connection, not with a town, not with civilization, but with something older, something deeper, a truth buried beneath snow and stone. That survival wasn't always about fire or strength. Sometimes it was about remembering how to disappear. The woman left without another word. Clara stood in the doorway long after the torches had faded. The children huddled behind her, Eli at her side, Thomas holding Henry, his breath slow and calm. Snow began to fall again, but soft now, gentle, no longer a threat, just a season, just a reminder that the world was still turning, that spring would come eventually. She stepped back into the ranger post and shut the door. This time, no bar needed. The cold would remain outside. Inside, they were safe. Not because of walls, not because of guns, because of choices, because a widow had built her house beneath the ground, because she'd let the world laugh, because she'd buried herself to rise again. And when they came calling, she had been ready, not just to survive, but to protect, to endure, to begin again, not in a cabin, not in a town, but in a hidden home beneath the earth. A home no one understood. A home they'd called a Hobbit hole until it saved them all.